Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Elizabeth Cowell, the university librarian. I know some of you, but some of you I don't. So thanks for coming down to the Digital Scholarship Commons. A couple of years ago, we asked some students, we did a survey about what students saw as barriers to their success. And one of the things that really came up was fear about career opportunity post-graduation. So we came up with this program, the Human Book, with Yope, to have successful alumni come and talk about what happened after graduation. And we've had 3 to date.
This is
and today, we're so happy to have Stephanie Foo here. And I want to personally thank you, Stephanie, for coming up to campus. I know it's a little bit of a contentious time on campus, but I think it's really important what you're doing and for the students and community to hear from you. So Stephanie is a 2008, I was saying that's the year I came to campus, she left, Stevenson grad. She's a writer and radio producer and spent several years on producing This American Life. And I just learned from her that they did a program on libraries that I haven't heard, so now I have to listen to it. We're all proud right now in the library world because library attendance is actually past movie attendance, which I find kind of amazing. So, yay libraries. She's produced dozens of radio stories and an Emmy-winning video short. Before that, she helped create Snap Judgment. Her work has also aired on shows like 99% Invisible and Reply All. She's an advocate for diversity in media. She wrote a piece for Transom about increasing racial and economic diversity in workplaces and created an audio hackathon to diversify the way people can access and share audio. She then led the development of Shortcut, a revolutionary app for sharing podcast audio, and was a Toe and Knight Fellow, and currently is writing an investigative memoir on complex PTSD. So welcome, Stephanie, again. Thank you so much for coming to visit us, and Yope Rubens, the library development director, is going to interview her today. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So hi, Stephanie. Before we start, I want to read a land acknowledgement. So we'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the Uyupi tribe of the Awaswas Nation. So as Elizabeth mentioned, we'll do this in an interview format. So I'll just go through a couple of questions, and once these questions are finished, I hope there's questions from the students as well, because that's kind of one of the main reasons we do the Human Book, is to bring people like Stephanie in direct contact with the students. So just to get us going, if you could tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how you ended up at UC Santa Cruz, why did you choose UC Santa Cruz, etc.
I grew up in San Jose, and to be completely honest, UC Santa Cruz is the only UC that admitted me, so that's why I came here. But I was happy about it. I was in Stevenson. I had a wonderful room in House 8 that overlooked the field, and I was a modern literature major.
Well, did other members of your family go to college before?
Yes.
Yeah, so was it expected of you to go to college?
Yes. My dad was the first in our family to go to college.
Right, yeah. So tell us a little bit more about your experience at UC Santa Cruz. You went to Stevenson, etc.
Yeah, I went to Stevenson. I volunteered at KZSC for one quarter and then got lazy. I was on the fish rep for a couple of years, and I taught Stevenson Core my final year here. I actually graduated in 2.5 years, so I kind of was like in and out. But
so how come you were, from such a kind of young age, already interested in media? Where'd that come from?
When I was in high school, I started my own zine called The Commotion. I was, inspired by like Riot Girl zines, and I loved how it gave me the opportunity to talk to people I would never usually talk to. Like my first interviews where I interviewed the hot guy on campus, or about like what it's like to be hot. And I would never get to talk to him, so that was really exciting. And yeah, it just gave me an excuse to be able to go and learn from people, create and get a more nuanced picture from people than what I had. And I got obsessed with it and was the editor-in-chief of my school newspaper. And I was just like, well, this is it. I'm going to be a journalist when I grow up. So.
Good decision?
Yeah, I think so. Worked out okay for me.
So back to UC Santa Cruz. When did you graduate?
2008.
2008. So you've been back for one day today?
Yep.
And has the place changed?
No. I mean, College 8 has a new name, which is great. I can't remember it. Rachel something?
Rachel Carson.
Rachel Carson. But besides that, no, not really. Which is, it's nice. It's like a time capsule.
And when you were in college, did you feel confident because you've clearly been successful in your life? Did you feel when you were in college? Did you feel, yeah, sure, I'll make it, or were there any doubts? And can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I was kind of nervous about it. I didn't do so good in high school, as I said. I had a 2.9. But I had been, my high school boyfriend went to school at UC Davis the year before me, and I had been doing most of his homework, so I felt like I could probably hack it. Yeah, I guess I was really nervous about it. I thought maybe I'll just work at In-N-Out for the rest of my life. Maybe I don't have talent. Maybe I'm not that smart. And then showing up and just loving the first class that I took, the Stevenson core class, and doing really awesome at it. And that gave me a lot of confidence. And I remember dropping out of my first couple of classes because I think it was intro to film or something, and he said, only the top 10% of students in this class will get an A. And so I thought, okay, that I can't do that. And then by the end of my time here, I was like, I did a good job. I was like, not summa, the other one. See, I didn't take Latin, but cum laude in general, I guess.
Yeah. So it ended up going well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could you attribute specific instances that happened on campus that helped you in your career? Maybe lessons that you learned or people you've met?
I learned that I'd do a lot better if I avoided math. So that helped my GPA. Let's see. I think certainly I got the opportunity to do lots of layout and interviews and things like that for the fish wrap. But I think more than academically, though, I did have some really great classes here that sort of set a foundation for humanities and set a foundation for a basic understanding of politics and story and how the world works and what are offensive stories that you should not do, and what are the compelling stories and issues that need to be addressed in the world. I also had just like a cultural, I think my major education was a cultural education, just in terms of sort of being indoctrinated to the hippie lifestyle and spending a lot of time in nature. And that being like a value system and a means of comfort for me for the rest of my life, I think.
And now you live in New York. Do you miss that?
Oh my God. It's horrible living in New York. But so it's hard. It's really hard. It's February now, so it's especially hard. It's cold.
So when you graduated, how did you feel? I mean, immediately after graduating, how did it feel because you clearly felt at home here, and it was a good experience, and now you graduated. How did that feel, and the first steps that you took after graduation?
I mean, it felt like, oh shit, I'm screwed. I mean, 2008, that wasn't a good year to find a job.
That's right.
Especially not a job in media. I remember getting an internship at The Onion and it folding a couple of months in, and then all of the other newspapers and magazines that I wanted to intern at also folding, or just really struggling to survive. And so I had this dream that I'd been chasing the past, 5 years of my life. And I was faced with just being like, oh, I guess I have to reevaluate that. And I know that everyone who was graduating in 2008, 2009 was also really struggling. I had lots of coworkers who were like going to go into law and who were not coworkers, but colleagues who were going to go into law and who were going to go into political science, and then we were baristas and working at the night shift at the gas station, and that was a hard reckoning, certainly. And so my shift was, I started out at a furniture supply warehouse, and that didn't go so well for me.
Why not?
My coworkers were kind of sexist. They started counting how many times I peed every day, and then I found out, and then I quit. Anyway, so it was a hard job market, and then I was just volunteering at 826 Valencia, which I don't know if you know is a wonderful organization that teaches kids how to write in San Francisco. So I just started as much volunteer work as I could. I actually started volunteering at the Santa Cruz, the Walnut Women's Center, and that was a really wonderful experience. And through that, all that volunteer work teaching kids, I was able to get a job teaching kids journalism in kids who were in elementary, middle school.
So that was a paid job.
And that was a paid job. I was paid $24,000 a year. A lot of it was layout and InDesign, and so I was listening to all these podcasts, and it got to the point where I was listening to 8 hours of podcasts a day. I discovered after I graduated from college here this show called This American Life. Did not grow up in a family where you listen to public radio, you listen to Celine Dion. It just wasn't, it wasn't a thing in our house. And I didn't know anybody who did. Like, all of my friends were people of color from lower to middle class households, and like NPR wasn't something that appealed to us. But this American Life show was really funny and tear-jerking and cool, and I just didn't know that you could tell stories that way in this totally compelling format. And so I thought, okay, since all the papers are closing, and this is a form of journalism that has made me cry and laugh like nothing I can remember, I guess maybe I'll just do this. So I started a podcast called Get Me on This American Life. And it was my first episode. I hitchhiked to the world's biggest porn convention and recorded it, and it was so bad. Ira was giving tips, interview tips, and you should do this in a story, and you should do that in a story. And so I would break in the middle of the podcast and be like, Ira tells us that we should do this. So now that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to universalize the story. Again, very bad. But after a few months of doing that, I emailed Jesse Thorne, UCSC alum, who was in public radio, and I sent him Get Me on This American Life.
Did you write him as an alum? Did you say, I'm a slug too?
Yeah, I was like, we had friends in common who had worked at KZSE. I mean, he was several years older than me, but the people who I was friends with who were older, we had connections. And so I was like, I know whoever, Sheila or whatever. And then I don't think he even listened to it. I hope he didn't. But he was kind of like, I don't know if this is the best way to get a job at This American Life, but okay, I think you're better off starting at a local station. And he sent it to this guy, Roman Mars, who is the manager at San Francisco's KLW. He'd just gotten a job as an executive producer at a brand new storytelling show called Snap Judgment. Snap Judgment is a lot like This American Life, but like more black. And they hired me as an intern because they were really impressed by my drive to make my own stuff. And then within 3 months, I was producing. In 3 years, I got my first story on This American Life. 4 years after Get Me on This American Life, I was a producer at This American Life. So, it's
You sound very driven constantly. I mean, from young, right? In the beginning of your story already. And so, where does that come from?
I mean, a lot of it is a curiosity, just really loving the content and the stories that I got to pursue. I was really lucky to work at places where I really was very rarely assigned things, and I mostly got to just produce whatever I wanted, and anything that I didn't want to do, I just didn't have to do. So that was really great. Not many people get to say that about their career. I love learning about this world. I love getting to know the nuances of human beings, and I found out I had some sort of talent for it. And all of that combined with probably an unhealthy relationship with work in terms of like, I feel sad. Well, am I going to feel sad, or am I just going to bury my sadness in working? Second option. So that. But I think a big part of it too was just wanting to make stuff. I mean, Ira always talks about this difference between taste, where like you can identify what's good and you know you're not good yet. And so there's this gap between like your taste and your personal ability. And that was one of the first things that I heard from him, and I always kind of felt that, where I was always just like, I see the gap, I want to be good. I see this ideal of this ability to write or produce, and I just want to get there because I want to make like one really good thing.
So you're trying to close that gap. Yeah. If you would meet Stephanie Foo at Stevenson today, and you could tell her, give her some advice, what are some of the things you would want to convey to yourself at that age?
I mean, everything turned out pretty good, but in general,
So don't worry.
maybe a little bit. Don't worry, yeah. And then some. I think I charged through my time at UCSC really quickly.
What do you mean by that?
Like graduating in 2.5 years, and
Right.
like just kind of taking any class that would fulfill requirements. And if I could take it back, I might like explore a little bit more, have more fun, take a wider variety of crazy classes without worrying about my GPA as much, because it turns out my GPA really didn't become relevant at all ever for me in my life. I mean, if you want to go to grad school, yeah, but like it wasn't relevant for me, and so I would have taken harder classes and messed up a little bit and had more and learned more. And also to eat better, probably.
Eat better. All right. Yeah. It's hard. There's not a lot of restaurants on campus where you can eat healthy food.
There's a lot of chicken nuggets in my past.
Gotcha. We're trying to change that in the Science and Engineering Library, but that's another conversation. So you've done a lot already, and what are you kind of envisioning for yourself in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? What are some professional goals that you maybe have, and some things you still want to do with your life, and how do you think you're going to manage getting there?
I mean, I always said, people would always ask me, like, what's your next step? What's your next goal in your 5 to 10 year plan when I worked at This American Life? And I was like, this has been my life dream. Like, I guess I'm just done. Like, what else is there to do? And then at a certain point of working there, I started to realize that my mental health was deteriorating because I had an unhealthy relationship with work. And I decided to prioritize my mental health for like the first time in my life. And it made such a huge impact on my happiness and the way that I operated and moved through the world that I really wanted to focus on writing about mental health and making that my beat and writing this book. And so I think that this book is my next really, really big goal. If it helps literally anybody else with complex PTSD, then I will have achieved what I want to achieve.
How far along are you with this book?
I just got my book deal like last week,
Yeah. Got a book deal.
but like 150 rough pages. I don't know. I'm at the beginning. It's going to be a whole thing. Like it's going to be a whole nother year. But yeah, I have one of the reasons why I'm here is I have a bunch of research to do about intergenerational trauma in San Jose, which is where I grew up. I want to talk to people who grew up there and clinicians who are supporting refugee communities there to try and interrupt the cycle of trauma, to prevent refugees and immigrants who have had to undergo a lot of horrible things from sort of neglecting their own mental health and then passing it on to their children. So.
Is that something your parents went through, or?
Yeah, my parents weren't refugees, but I think that they had to go through some pretty tough things, including poverty. My grandma and grandpa spent time in prison and jail, and I think they didn't quite get a lock on things. And I had a really difficult childhood with a lot of abuse and neglect. And I want to make sure that when I have kids, that doesn't get passed on.
Are your parents proud of your success?
Oh, this is an unplanned question. No, they don't know what I do. My dad knows that he was excited when I got an Emmy, but I don't think audio is his medium.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think my parents, they don't get it, which, you know, that's kind of an NPR problem a little bit, so.
Maybe, yeah. UC Santa Cruz is proud of your
Oh,
success.
thank you.
Yeah, so like that. So,
Can you like give me rent money too?
sorry, can't do it.
Thank you.
So, those are my questions. I would love to open it up to.
Can I
anybody
say
who's-
one
go
thing
ahead.
too?
Yes.
About I mean I just say that I think it's great that you guys opened it up, or that you opened it up, talking about my focus on diversity, and I just wanted to talk about that for like a
Go
minute.
ahead. Yes, please.
Just that I think one of the difficult things of being a woman of color in journalism is sometimes being the only woman of color in certain rooms and just fighting to be heard in the same way as people who are older or whiter or more manly than me. And sort of also having that self-courage, especially when all of the editors around me and the people in power around me weren't people of color. And a lot of times they weren't women either. And so I think it's really hard to be empowered in that sense and be able to say in a meeting, like, hey, I think that is kind of offensive if you kind of are like the most junior person in the room. and you're the only Asian person in the room. I remember it being really difficult. I was teaching Self and Society, which is a course about religion, race, and gender, to Stevenson, and I was the only person of color in the room. And so my students all told me that racism no longer existed, and I had to tell them, well, I have seen some before. So that being said, I think that translates into academia as well, in that, you know, there needs to be access in academia. I mean, one of the barriers to entry in journalism is, for a long time, they didn't pay interns, or they didn't pay them enough, which prevented anyone from, except like rich or white people, to get these jobs who are funded by their parents and to then move on and move up the chain. So of course, I think it's really important that we have affordable housing on campus, and I just think it's really important that the barrier to entry for people who want to get an education to enter academia is low, so that, you know, people can afford to do this. And also, that means that if we're like making it equal to get in at this level, then hopefully at higher levels, when there's other more experienced professors, people can see people who look like them eventually and feel empowered to make these decisions, to enter academia, to write, to publish, and to be intellectuals in this space. And I just wanted to say that.
And thank you for saying that, because that's actually one of the main reasons we started this program, is to invite people who might have more in common with the students right now than their professors necessarily at this point maybe have. So thanks for saying that. Very important message. So any questions from anybody? Yes,
Yeah,
please.
actually, in regards to that sort of issue or that question of diversity.
Hold on one second.
Yeah, I had a question about that issue of diversity. One of it being, I wonder if you can share any stories, or if you could share any stories of you being the only woman of color in the room within the media industry, and how you sort of navigated that experience.
Let's see. I mean, I think it's a complex question because it's happened different times. I think eventually, I think I got kind of good at inviting other women and other people of color into the room, and having conversations with my bosses where I was like, hey, you know, if we're going to be doing this episode on Black culture, you know, maybe we should bring in guest editors, and I'd come up with some great names. Like maybe we should bring in this person and this intellectual and this science fiction writer to sit in this room and edit along with us. And so I think that was really empowering, because I think that a couple of times when I was in those rooms, I remember one time we were doing a story about, I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was a sexual assault story or something about it was a very women-centric issue. And the men in the room, which were there were more men in the room than there were women. And there was a total divide in the way that we handled the story, between all the women wanted us to handle it one way and all the men wanted us to handle it another way. And I think my editor, who was a woman, was really smart in just pointing that out and just being like, hey, there might be a reason why there's a contingent here, and maybe because it's about women, you guys should be listening to us. And they were very like, oh, right. So I think it's very effective to guilt trip people. And sometimes just pointing things out in a polite and reasonable but like steadfast way of saying like, hey, as a person of color, as this, I think I have the right to be heard here, so maybe listen up. And also trying to open the door whenever you can to not just elevate other women of color or women or minority populations in being able to have opportunities working with shows or anything else, but also so that you're not the only one there. Would be just two. pieces of advice.
You said that you discovered you
Hold on
had.
one second.
Oh, okay. You said that you discovered that you had a talent for interviewing. Are there certain tips or questions that you find are really important to ask? Or
Yeah, I think that interviewing is essentially being a really good conversationalist. I think being really, really curious and passionate about getting this other person's story, being able to be really present in what they're saying, and being a good listener. And I mean, there's a couple of different schools of thought in radio journalism. One of them is that you stay out and you get out of the way and you just let this other person talk. For me personally, or for This American Life anyway, we're taught, or we were taught to, that by telling the story, we are automatically present. And so I tried to have really human reactions to things and make my human reactions to things. If somebody said something unbelievable, I would say, oh my God, that's incredible. I can't believe that. Are you serious? You know, if somebody said something really horrible, I'd be like, I would acknowledge their pain, their suffering. If they're really going through a thing, I'm like, hey, do you want a drink of water? You know? And I would get really good at moving the mic back and forth where somebody would tell a joke and I would be like, ha 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 ha. Because I got to like record out all of my feelings and interactions. And then also just, I think probably at least 8 times in an interview, I ask, how did that feel? Because for me, I'm not trying to necessarily get all of the like information out of a person, like the nuts and the bolts of how things work, as much as I'm trying to get a snapshot of who they are as a human being. I can fill in some of the nuts and bolts later. Like I really want feeling emotion. I want to be with this person in a moment and experience that in order to have true empathy for them. And so I think that's something that I prioritize every time I go into an interview with somebody. My last tip is just that Ira always says that an interview is like a party that you're throwing, which is like whenever I do an interview, I try to get a little bit pumped up. And like if you're energetic and you're friendly, you're gonna get that right back at you in response. And if you're terrified and you're like grumpy, then you're gonna get that right back too. So trying to throw good parties is my MO.
Any other party questions?
What's the best class that you had at UC Santa Cruz?
Wow. Well, I have an old professor here, so I feel compelled. I would say that the class that made me go the most was really my first freshman core Stevenson class, because that was the first time that I had been in a discussion section where I was like, oh, we don't just learn the material, but we also get to argue about it? That's so cool. So I think that was really exciting for me, and that it gave me just a really great basis of like religion and gender and race that I got to take to all of my other classes, including yours. And also I loved your class. I really loved Vilashni Kupan's class, because she did some immigrant literature classes that were really wonderful, and you know, immigrant literature is something that you focused on too, and so that became a really big, I really related to that. And I liked my oceans classes because I got to go to the tide pools.
Thank you.
As someone who also struggles with trauma and healing, it can be difficult to make a distinction between absorbing someone else's trauma when you're interviewing or something like that. So what does your self-care look like in order to like distance and like to not have it weigh so heavy on you, to like feel it but also not be burdened with the weight of the world almost?
That's a tricky one. I think historically I've just put it in a box and buried it deep inside. But I think part of it is I think I just try and, part of it is just in the interview, I try to have a real moment with people. And if I really feel like they're moving me, and like I've cried in interviews together with people where we hold hands and cry together, you know, and kind of having that all in the open and acknowledging those feelings instead of pretending that they don't exist is really helpful, I think. I think shaping their story is actually really therapeutic for me, because a lot of times I try to not make stories so just bleak and depressing with no way out. The stories that I make, on the whole, the vast majority of them have complex or happy endings where there is like some sort of hope in the future for them. And so taking people's stories that seem hopeless and having them teach me how they've got through those moments, or teaching me what they've learned from those moments, or trying to have elements of hope in there, even though it's not really direct. I think that giving them that story and putting that story out in the world also is a way that gives me hope. Also having other journalist friends to who we can just get together and cry and talk about things is really important, and having a therapist. So just having like a community, and talking. I hope that's helpful.
As a lot of students are thinking about what's next for them, they're thinking about graduate school. And I think that's something you must have thought about and decided not to go to graduate school. And can you talk a little bit more about that?
I signed up for the GRE, and then I didn't study enough math in time, so I didn't go.
Always the math.
It's always the math. I considered it during the crash, or the recession, because I was like, maybe if I get more education, then I'll be qualified for something. But then, I'm going to be in debt, so what am I going to do? And also, I don't know math. So I think I just had this idea of like, I'm just going to hustle. I'm just going to hustle and hustle and hustle and see where it gets me. And if it doesn't get me anywhere, then I guess I can like try doing it on my own. But I think one of the really big important things about going to grad school specifically for journalism, I can't say that this is true for like med school or something, is that it really is about connections. Because all of the skills that you learn in journalism, you can totally learn on the job. You don't really need school for any of it. And I think that's true for a lot of different fields. But I think one of the reasons why people go to grad school is to get those important big name connections by talking to well-connected professors and things like that. And for me, I don't know what is wrong with me or what, but I just have had no like fear historically of just going up to people and being like, you're my mentor now. So that worked, actually. Just going up to people I really admired and being like, I really admire you. Here's my stuff. Can we be friends? And like, obviously sometimes it didn't work, and then sometimes it did. And it was those connections that were able to pull me through. So I would say, I don't know, in journalism specifically, I try to tell everybody you don't need to go to grad school. It's like a waste of money, which, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say. But yeah,
Don't worry. Yeah.
but I
Sounds
teach
like
it. I
graduate
teach
school.
grad
Graduate
school.
school was mentorship.
Yeah.
I think there's another question, a couple of other questions.
Yeah, on the topic of hustling, I was wondering if you could maybe take us back to your Get Me on This American Life podcast. I know you talked about maybe being more embarrassed about it than having fond memories, but I'm wondering what was the idea behind the podcast? I tried looking for episodes, but I was unfortunately I couldn't find
If you go
any.
to Pilot, episode 1, Google
Okay.
me and Pilot, and it's the first episode, then you can hear snippets of it because I played it for Ira Glass. It was a very cringeworthy experience. Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, more so I'm wondering how you thought of the idea and like what the sort of podcast was about and what the stories were that you told and how you ended up getting into like Roman Mars and like later on bigger name people.
So I basically, at that time, I felt like I was a pretty good writer, actually. And I thought that was one of the big stumbling blocks for me in terms of getting, aside from the recession, was this idea that I had to be really, whatever I wrote had to be really good. And I kind of thought, well, if I make this radio thing, it's gonna be terrible. Like, it's gonna be awful. But that really drew me to it, because I thought, I'm gonna make the first episode and it's gonna be super shitty. And if the next one is like even 3% less shitty, then I'll be improving at a thing. And that's great, I'll be learning. And so I totally that was my whole goal. Is like everyone is gonna be a little bit better and that's it. Which is a low bar, and so it was easy to meet it. And then I think just in terms of the idea behind it, I don't know, like I used to work at the River Cheese Shop, and like I had found that like in getting these gigs and internships and stuff, it just helps if you go like a little bit of an extra way. I remember I made like I decorated my application with like watercolor cheese, and I got the job. And so I thought, if I want to make this podcast, I don't know how to make any podcast, and I don't even listen to that many podcasts, but if I just try to imitate this one podcast and make a direct copy of it, maybe then, that's how you learn to draw, that's how you do anything, is you make a copy. And then I just thought, I'll just get in front of the fact that I'm making a copy. I'm not going to fake that I'm making a copy. I'll just say that it's a copy. Get Me on This American Life. So,
It worked.
yeah. And in terms of like early episodes, I remember, like you're too young for this. I Can Has Cheeseburger was a thing at the time. Anything that I thought was interesting, basically, I was like, I'll interview that guy. I'll interview that I Can Has Cheeseburger guy. I went to, the Dickens Fair. Do you guys know what the Dickens Fair is? I went to the Dickens Fair, and I did a story about like the singing pirates, Dickens Fair. And, I found out that a friend of mine from UCSC did this thing called SCA. Do you know what the Society for Creative Anachronism is? It's these people that dress up like medieval, and like accurate medieval outfits, and they all go to war and bash each other in the head with big sticks. So I went to war with them, and they put me in the suit and bashed me in the head, and just like any crazy thing.
And you made a show about it.
Yeah. Anything crazy thing that I thought was interesting, which I later realized that is not the way to find good stories. There are other criteria, perhaps, to keep in mind besides, is it do I personally think it's cool? But at the time, it was super fun. Actually, I have the content was very embarrassing, but I have super fond memories of it, and I just have a real respect for that kid. Just like, how did you have the balls to do that? And there's a real freedom before you get, this sounds so bougie. This is like the bougiest thing I'm about to say, but there's like this real freedom before you get successful and other people are watching. Nobody's listening to you, so you can just make whatever crazy thing that you want. So
Take risks.
take risks. That's my big advice to anyone starting out is like, just be a little bit nuts. Just like be the most yourself, the craziest yourself now, because this is your chance. And like innovate. This is your chance to make something crazy that nobody else has made and differentiate yourself. So.
Speaking of success, could you tell us about your Emmy? Where did that come from?
Oh.
And what was it like to have that kind of success?
It's not like, okay, full disclosure, I don't know if you see this. Best Writing Special Class and Best Short Format Special Class. It's a Short Format Special Class Daytime Emmy. So if you want to win an Emmy, just like enter to the most obscure, tiny category in the Emmys. Like, it's not Best Picture. So just putting that out there. And though it is an Emmy, so that's kind of, I mean, it's in my house. It looks cool. So This American Life wanted to do a short film with this director, Bianca Gaver, who had done a couple of really cool sort of homemade style videos before. And she had come to us saying, like, I have this idea that I want to solve people's problems. Like, it was called Videos for You. And people would come to us with personal issues and we would solve them via video. And at that point in This American Life, I had just started. I was like 26 or 27, and I was like, I will say yes to any opportunity that comes on. And so they said, who wants to be a producer-director for this film? And everybody else was like, and I was like, I'll do it, sure. So me and Bianca worked on these films for a few months, actually. The first film that won all this is basically a woman and her boyfriend had been together for 8 years and had never said I love you to each other. And so this woman was like, this is stupid, and I want to finally make a video saying I love you to him. And so we made this epic best I love you video of all time where we had his favorite band playing, and he loves puppies, so we just had puppies. We had like a pile of burritos this big because he loves burritos. And then that won. And he said I love you back. So.
Any more questions? Well, and there's another one. Yeah.
I just wonder if you could say anything about advice to people who might be just beginning to dabble in podcasting of some regard, and any sort of tips to novices when it comes to anything from like collecting audio in an interview or in the field, or storyboarding or editing, anything like that. It's kind of like, don't do this, do this.
Oh God. Well, I mean, I teach this, so like I could go on for like hours, but I don't know if I have to. I think my criticals for the very novice are be weird, take risks, make your own shit, and set your own deadlines for yourself, so that you have to make something once every 2 weeks or every month or whatever is feasible for your own schedule, and then pay attention to your attention, which is pay attention to the things that make you happy. Pay attention to what is making you sad in your life. Pay attention to your challenges and what's pissing you off. I always say, don't get mad, get tape. So whatever it is that is driving you crazy, like I did a story about being on dating apps while Asian, and all of the yellow fever guys that were creepy. I've done stories. I mean, so many of my stories are just informed by things that I personally just really care about, including this book now. So especially if you are of a minority group, especially if you are young, because we don't have young voices. We don't have as many minorities as we should. We don't have indigenous voices or trans voices on air. And so pay attention to the stuff that you care about as a young person. Don't worry about like if it's NPR worthy. Don't try and talk like an NPR person. Use your own individual voice. Don't try to imitate. I mean, if you want imitate other people, I shouldn't say don't try to imitate other people because it's clear that's what I did. But like, don't try to be a different version of yourself that's more buttoned up or what you think other people will, like NPR people, like old people will will enjoy, especially now when you're in college and you're like experimenting and making crazy weird things. Just try to be as purely yourself as possible. You have the whole rest of your life to like do stuff for bosses.
True.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to end. And Stephanie's going to be here for a little while longer, and there's snacks in the back, so feel free to chat.
This cucumber flavor is good.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.